like that.
All right, what's up, guys? I'm here with my boy Steven right now. Tell us how old you are and what you're building right now.
Yeah, so I just turned 25. I used to work in AI. Now I quit my job late last year. Now I'm working on a quantitative trading fund. It's a small fund, kind of like more akin to a family practice. But I'm still very much like tapped into a lot of the AI spaces. A lot of my friends working in AI, some in crypto as well. And yeah, so happy to just chat about whatever, shoot the shit, drink some nectar. I'm excited.
Yeah, man. Sweet. Well, let's start out with a little bit of background. You're originally from LA, and where'd you end up going to school?
Yeah, so I grew up in LA, and I went to Stanford for college, for undergrad. And yeah, I was class of 22, so been out, in the real world for about 3 years. I think I'm getting the hang of things, but it's definitely an interesting time in the valley because I know like a lot of people I meet. I was just traveling Europe for a month, and like the vibes are very different from the outside looking in. I get a lot of people ask me about like what's tech like, what's entrepreneurship, what's Silicon Valley like, and like I think from coming from Stanford, you get kind of a very you get
You're very immersed in.
you're very
the center of
immersed.
it, yeah.
Yeah, it's a bit of an insider view into how things work, like venture capital. For one, like like raising money, I think is something that is like when you don't know too much about it, and you heard your friend just raise $25 million, and you're from like small town, San Diego or somewhere. It sounds like too good to be true almost, right? But I think just having seen so many of those things go down and like the ins and outs of what actually happens and like it's not just free money. Like they're not like these investors are not just stupid people giving you money, right? So and there's good and bad. There's like a lot of gray areas as well. So yeah, so that's like kind of my perspective coming into San Francisco. It's like a little bit.
You got a very good view of it because coming from my standpoint at like Arizona State, the idea of young guys raising this much money is unheard of, and a lot of people
Yeah.
don't really understand raising capital, especially like you were saying in Europe. It's a
It's
very
so
foreign
different.
idea, very less into it's entrepreneurship's much less got into, especially at a young age.
Yeah.
I actually spoke to VCs there, and their whole thing, they said, as like after giving you the investment, was trying to then get you to move to San Francisco, which is
Yeah.
pretty crazy. In London, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like top
and London
VCs.
too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, San Francisco. It's kind of like there's a bit of a joke in the valley. It's like because I know a lot of people that kind of shit on the city. They're like, oh, it's not that fun. It's not like New York. There's something to do. There are some things to do, especially like in like the marina, which is
Yeah.
where I am at. But it is true that like it's much less of a kind of like super social scene. And if you are more social, like you're gonna feel pressure to like stay indoors, and it's
Yeah.
like people joke, oh, it's like it's a feature. It's like not a bug. Like the investors are like, oh, you're gonna spend so much more time like grinding on your company. It's gonna make you grow so much faster. But what they really mean is like there's nothing better to do for you. But it is true. Like people in this city in particular, like they're just grinders.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like I love New York too. Like New York is very fun, but like people say that New York is becoming the next tech capital. I think it's a little bit overblown. Not to like like I think there's a lot of great companies coming out of there, but like it's still very much centered around the Bay, especially like with AI. It's like,
What I've heard is typically past like your Series B, people will move to New York City, which
Yeah.
is like for other people like a stage of like funding where you're pretty much approaching like a less of early startup phase. And would you say then that should be the case where if you're starting to pick up more, you should go to New York City, or are you saying you think they should stay to San Francisco?
well, I think it mostly depends on what like. There's two main things. There's the culture of the company, like who you're hiring. I think the other one is like what is the nature of your business. To touch on like the culture aspect, I think if your company is kind of building something that is more like I don't know, finance related, social related, like you need marketing, you need like mass influence, and it's not just like Twitter marketing. New York could be a good good spot to be because like there's more like of a kind of outside eye into the city and like a lot of things that happen in New York City. It's like a lot of young professionals. So you're gonna cross paths with people that are like not just in tech. You kind of get like a bit more of a well-rounded slash broader scope of people you're meeting, right? So if you need to be in that environment, and like also if you're closing a lot of deals where you're like you're closing the deals like at the dinner table rather than like over Zoom.
You mean closing deals is in like raising money or
Raising money also for like
startup?
clients, like if you're, because I think in New York it's like people are much more, almost everything that you do professionally is done like not necessarily like in your house. It's like kind of done. You're going out meeting people, right?
Yeah.
Like every single day. Like all my friends in New York, whenever I'm there, every single weekend there's something to do, and half of it is social, half of it is like somewhat networky, like business things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas,
So
yeah, go ahead.
I guess, yeah, like you're saying in New York, then for a lot of people it's much better if you have a lot of business out there, but for maybe deep tech companies,
Yeah.
that would make San Francisco a better spot to stay.
Yeah, if you're doing like heavy research, like if you're, yeah, so the other part of the culture is like if your culture is very much like your distinguishing factor is not necessarily your distribution, but your technology. Like I'm looking at like the Anthropics and OpenAI is like, distribution is a big portion, but fundamentally speaking, these companies are chasing like just the top of the top AI researchers and trying to ship the best possible product that people will just grow to use and love because of its quality. In that case, there's really no other place to be than San Francisco or just the Bay Area in general, like Palo Alto as well. Simply because there's just so much of a talent pool, but it also makes things very competitive because like it's kind of a feedback system, right? Because the best researchers, the top minds, they're already in this area, and so they're just going to get a lot of competition from like all the top AI companies that are just going to pay them crazy sums, right? You mentioned like Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook. He just bought Scale. Scale is my old company. He paid like $15 billion for it, and I don't know, like the CEO like of my company, like he just cashed out like $1 billion straight cash.
He's like 26.
No, he's like almost 30.
30?
I would say he's like he's probably 28 at this point.
Okay.
And like he's also paying, like he's starting, like Zuck is starting this like AI launch, like, or not launch lab, like this I think it's super intelligence lab. And word on the street, my mom always texts me. She's like, this AI researcher is getting paid $100 million for like a signing bonus.
Stuff. Yeah.
And she's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, Mom, like chill. But it's true. Like if you have that kind of draw, and as an opportunity for a researcher, like you're just going to stay in this area.
Yeah.
Right. So like, and it's just going to attract all the top minds, and the top minds are going to build the best companies. And so like, you're kind of hard pressed if you're going to be anywhere else.
Okay. Yeah, because that's another question I have actually. So pretty much, you spent a lot of time working in AI, and now you're kind of gravitating towards crypto, which
a little bit, yeah.
I've heard it's very difficult to find a really solid engineer that also understands crypto, because a lot of people that are really into crypto are just kind of your.
The culture is different, especially
Yeah.
if you look into the history. I didn't really get into crypto until I think earlier last year. That was when I was like starting more of my quantitative stuff. And the thing with crypto is like, yeah, you get this huge mix of people where, because money moves so like in such a crazy manner, you get a lot of people that like are like a little bit degenerate. Like they're just gambling, they're doing stupid shit. But at the same time, what that means is like there's a lot of opportunity for development. Like if you have an idea, like you can move actually quite fast with it if you have the right team. Like even this last year, if people like, I know crypto's not really in the news. People might be hearing like Bitcoin's going up. You're hearing about like Hyperliquid, a little bit about Solana. But like people don't really know what's like, like I think my perspective is if you're coming from the outside, you don't really like hear much news outside of the price movement. But there's been like a lot of development in technology, and like the like culture shift is like every single month there's some kind of like new thing going on, and half of it is just like hype and someone trying to just make a buck, and sometimes there are like actual not technological, I would say like it's just advancement and development that kind of shift the way people think. And I'm not one of those guys that are like, crypto is going to solve everything. I actually used to be very anti-crypto because when it was pitched to me, especially at Stanford, it was like, yeah, and not to like, I think there are two school of thoughts, not to like say mine is better, but I think the first school of thought I was exposed to was that crypto was just going to provide this like crazy utility that is just going to fundamentally change everything we do, right? Kind of how AI is pitched right now. But it wasn't just about financial transactions. It was also about like back in the NFT days, like in 2021, it was like even things like file sharing or like, games for that matter. You would like invest in assets in your game and like it would be an NFT that you would trade. And in theory, like that kind of makes sense, but like you have to think there's so much overhead if you want to. You're re-solving a problem that's already been solved ages ago. Like, CSGO skins, right? People trade that shit. And like that's been an economy since the early days of the game. I don't play CSGO, but I have friends that like kind of dabble in that.
I played CSGO.
Yeah. So like,
I've traded skins and stuff like that.
So like that's been around for a while. Like you don't need blockchain to do that. It doesn't really add any value or utility outside of like.
That's a good point. It's not like changing the game.
Right. It's not changing anything. You're just making it harder.
And it's not going to make those skins worth way more money now that it's an NFT. It's like kind of going to trend towards the same price point.
Yeah. And it's like part of it is like part of the price could be like the hype, and you're just making things a lot harder to do. So that was my first exposure to crypto, and I was like,
I guess it just makes it way more complicated.
Yeah, it's so much more complicated.
Because I can see that perspective, but then also I do see a lot of utilities. What did change your mind? Like when was?
Well, yeah. So my first that was the first school of thought I was exposed to was like, crypto is like super utility, and I could see the argument for finance, but for like other things, I was kind of turned off by it, and so a lot of the people that were pitching me, I think
a lot of people were as well.
Yeah, they were pitching me like, there's such deep utility here, and I'm like, this seems a little disingenuous. Like, I'm sure there are ways to make crypto work, but like, it's not a hammer that fits every problem. And so, but more recently, like last year, I'm now of the school of thought, the secondary school of thought, which at first was ridiculed, but I think mainstream and a lot of people in crypto didn't like it. It's great for one thing, and it's gambling. Like it's literally like people want to gamble.
That's a good point.
It's like, and it's the best platform because like it is the perfect form of like kind of digital gambling that is like, you could, it's hard to necessarily crack down on. Like if you buy something on chain, that you can sell it if the things are, if everything's set up correctly. Like you can verify that you can sell it, and you can't just like have a casino kind of shut down and kind of cut you off. And a lot of people at first were very adverse to it. They're like, no, like there's so much utility. But I'm like, gambling itself is what people like doing that, and especially in this day and age. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I think like young people in particular, like our age and younger, it's become such a big thing to gamble. And like even like on my Instagram reels, I guess it's a little different, but like, or maybe my reels are a bit biased, but like there's a lot of memes of like, just like about how gambling is so not good for you, but like it's kind of like what like you'd rather
like
gamble
gambling,
right than like have a job or something.
I see that stuff too.
And I think it's like there's a culture and mindset shift here because like it used to be back in the day that you could work at a corporate job, climb the ladder and like retire, or like have a big house, front lawn, nice little family, and that's kind of guaranteed to you if you just like work at your desk job for like 5-10 years, you're gonna have a great life. But I think people are especially young people, we're looking into the future. We're looking at what is out there for us, and we kind of realize that it's kind of a lopsided deal. Like if you're working for a company that doesn't care for you, your paycheck's getting ripped by the U.S. government. Half, like most of it isn't coming, or not most, but like a big portion of it just isn't going to you. And like God knows what the government's doing with the money. And then like, and also like you have inflationary pressure and the economy's uncertain. There's so much uncertainty about the future that like 20-year time horizon of like working for the American dream has really been disillusioned for a lot of young people, from what I see. And so I think the mindset there is, I'd rather take a chance and gamble and make it rich now than work for something that is just fundamentally gonna waste my youth away. Because like being young is also a treasure, you know.
It's interesting you say that because I feel like a lot of the problems you bring up are reasons why crypto is popular, not necessarily because of the gambling point there.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just because there's a lot of distrust in our financial system. I mean,
Absolutely.
Bitcoin was started as a response to 2008.
There's actually funny enough, I think Bitcoin, there's a bit of a pushback on Bitcoin now because like people are saying the problems that Bitcoin was designed to solve, like anonymity, for example, it doesn't really offer the anonymity. And I know
'Cause you can trace wallets.
you can
pretty
trace
well.
it's everything's on chain. So like if you know
Yeah.
one wallet, like you can literally see how every single Bitcoin moves. And also each Bitcoin isn't the same. Like there's this notion of fungibility, which means that like every coin is like exactly can be substituted for one another. But because Bitcoin is traced, if you go way back, you know, like if there's one Bitcoin on chain that like, you know, the FBI seized because it was part of like the Silk Road or some kind of dark market, you know,
Yeah.
that coin will be less valuable in like, you know, in theory and on paper to be exchanged than like a freshly minted Bitcoin that no one has touched yet. Because, you know, if that coin is associated with kind of, you know, illicit activities, there's a chance, you know, there's a risk that if you then move that coin to your Coinbase, like if you bought, you know, even if you bought it legitimately, like, you know, you're just like a regular guy,
Yeah.
if you buy a tainted Bitcoin, there's a chance that then you're going to draw attention from the SEC or even the FBI or other agencies, and these exchanges might even like, you know, give you some problems simply because you bought a Bitcoin that years in the past was associated with, you know, criminals. So there's that kind of dissonance where like Bitcoin is not necessarily the perfect solution for like anonymous crypto transactions and all that.
Is there a crypto that you prefer?
Well, for that particular purpose, like the big alternative to that is Monero, and I know like not many people know about Monero. It's basically what Bitcoin was, but like every single transaction is completely anonymous, or not completely, but like it uses technology where it obfuscates the transaction, so you don't know. You know that a transaction went through, but you don't know who sent it, and you don't know who received it, and you also don't know the amount if you don't own one of those accounts that are receiving it. But the actual data still lives on chain, so you can spend it. Monero has its own problems, but if I were to choose, like if my, you know, if you know it was an apocalyptic scenario, and I had to choose one currency to use, to kind of like that kind of brings the promise of that Bitcoin was initially trying to provide, it would probably be Monero. There are other alternatives too. There's like Zcash, you know, stuff like that. But there's worries about these like centralization for these other coins. But
So
yeah,
it kind of sounds like you're saying with the current issues, Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, but cryptocurrency's main function at the moment is just gambling.
It's
the primary utility.
Yeah,
Do you see more utility in the future though? Do you think it is superior technology to our current currencies?
I mean, it's interesting, right? Because like I'm also not like anti-Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin, you know, even though it's not like the perfect solution, like it is, I think it's proven itself to be a very good store of value. Like, you know, and you know.
So do you think in maybe 10 to 20 years you could see it being
having
more utility?
I could see Bitcoin being
fiat
something
currency?
like, you know, it could be something like gold, right?
Yeah.
Where there's just limited amount and people, you know, it's inflated because there's a limited amount. And I can see something like Monero to be like the everyday currency that people use that kind of trades at more of a stable price. Although, like, I think, you know, I wouldn't necessarily like put a big portion of my portfolio into Monero, at least not yet, simply because like the U.S. government, like all the governments around the world hate it.
Why do they hate it?
Because they can't control it. Like that's the whole point. Like you can't.
Yeah.
There's a reason why Bitcoin gets all the attention and not Monero, is because like if
The FBI
everyone was
likes
using
that.
Monero,
They can kind of track.
then-
They can track everything now. it
yeah,
seems
like it's like we live in a digital like kind of surveillance age, and like something like Monero is just like all the, you know, the entities in power just definitely do not like this one technology. So you know, like the only way Monero will see like real adoption is if like there's some kind of like cataclysmic, or not cataclysmic, but some kind of event where the world as we know it just shifts completely, and we kind of, you know, move into more of like a, I don't know, I don't want to say dystopian, but more like techno-punk kind of world where there's a lot more distrust into the federal governments and things like, and just people lose
I
trust.
mean, we're already starting to see that a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really unfortunate, and like because I think it's one thing, like I see these things and I'm a realist, right? And I see that like there's a lot of things that we do, we as in the U.S., but also other countries, right? Like like what is real freedom? What is real like transparency? And like I think in America we have this luxury of kind of believing that we live in the purest form of a free world that we possibly could be in. But that also is a mindset that can actually cause you to be more susceptible to government overreach. Because if you think you live in a free society, then your guard's kind of down, right?
Yeah.
But I will say like we're probably like we're the freest country by far. So? I think so.
Because you've been to China as well.
Well, so China's not a free country. Oh,
it's not a free country.
Well, absolutely. Like I like China. Like don't get me wrong. It's not a free country. I think there's definitely some propaganda, like social credit.
Sounds like from what you've told me, it sounds very overblown how like controlled China is.
Yeah. Well, they have China's system is a bit different. Like in China, people know that it is authoritarian. Like people know that the government has the final say, and like if you criticize Xi Jinping, or if you like do things that are considered anti-party, yeah, they will come after you in the sense like they'll probably warn you first, then they'll come after you, be like threaten you with jail time. So yeah, you have people that like fundamentally that is controlling, but I think for a lot of other things they do have a bit more freedom. Like in the U.S. we have we have things where because we think it's like the political system that we live in. Like me personally, I think Democrats and Republicans, they're really all kind of the same thing. We kind of they kind of get played off each other,
Yeah.
We live, you could say in a more of an oligarchy, where like it's really the money that speaks. So everything you see, like the media, it's all kind of owned by the same people. It's like the same companies, and like the politicians, they're also backed by the wealthiest people, right? So the wealthiest people in America kind of control the power, and everything that you see and you hear kind of goes through a filter. Whereas that is also the case in China, but in China, it is very clear who holds the power. Like in America, we think that it's the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's like MSNBC and CNN and Fox News that tell us things, but it's really like it's all one big club, and you're not in it.
Yeah.
Whereas in China,
it's all owned by one of the same corporations.
It's just like a few corporations, and like whereas in China you have everyone knows that all the information you're hearing is coming from the government, right? And the thing is like
it's a little bit more direct. It's like
it's very direct, and people know,
yeah.
And it's not like hidden. It's not like necessarily hidden. And the other thing in China is you have like money is powerful, but it's not the final say. Like there's this like what happened with I forgot, like Huawei. At first, I think they ran into some problems because that company was getting so big that they were like kind of taking over more power from the government. They had more influence, and the government just like cracked down on them. And they were like, you can't do this. Like we are the party, and like we're not going to let you do that. Whereas in the U.S., like if you grow big enough, like if you're Zuckerberg or if you're Elon, right, you influence politics. You influence the way the country runs. And I mean, these are two different schools of thought, and like you can argue which one is better. I think they both they both have merit. I think the big problem with the U.S. system is that power is actually very non-transparent. We live on a, at least as a citizen, right? We think we live in a super transparent democratic system, but so much of what we think and hear is directly influenced by people and corporations that we don't really think about. So when we look to blame people, when we look to assign blame to things that are going wrong, we don't really know like we're not really talking to the right people. Whereas in China, it's like you can't, like as long as the government like in place allows for, if they're like looking out for the people, which isn't always the case. That's how you get dictatorships. Then at least like it'll run, it's like more aligned. Whereas in America, it's kind of like corporate interests. There's a lot of like self-interest, what benefits corporations first over the people. So yeah, that's just a bit of a tidbit, but like, yeah, so it's just like, it's two different systems. But I do think that by and large, we have the most freedoms in America. Like we can say for the most part what we want. We can kind of go where we want. And like, yeah, that's great. So.
For sure. Well, one thing you brought up earlier that I hear actually misused a lot, especially in like the crypto kind of demographic with the rise of, day trading. People throw around the term quant a lot. I'll see like Instagram pages where it's like quant this, and it's literally just like technical analysis, looking at charts. Do you want to explain what quant trading is?
Well, quant's a bit different. So, I mean, quantitative trading is basically using all the information that's out there, like digital information or just like whatever information you can get into a computer.
Yeah.
This could be like in traditional finance. This could be like, news sources even. It could be like, or it doesn't have to just be technical indicators. Yeah, it could be like, information that you pull from, like you can scrape, for example, sentiment online for like certain topics, right? Or you can look at, if you can measure what is like public perception to like this one particular product that might be more indicative of a whole. And so quant trading, like when people think about it, you think of just like nerds crunching numbers, like with all these crazy algorithms. And part of it is that. But another portion of it is just like how do you filter and sift through all that information and then, package it in a way that you can then run those algorithms on, that a computer will then be able to find some kind of imbalance between, expected price versus, inherent value for certain assets or tickers. And there's other methods where that's more discretionary quant. There's also like just like pure quantitative, like arbitrage methods. For example, one method is like, if you have a family of stocks, like it's like tech stocks, and this is like a very common pattern that's like, it's been overused, so there's not much alpha left. But like, if you find that these stocks tend to move in conjunction, like their relative prices tend to be the same, then you could, or like they would revert. Like if like when one increases, the other like decreases, the relative gap between them tends to revert back to like, some mean. Then what you can do is like, if you look at, if the gap grows kind of wide, right? Like one stock is trading higher than the other stock at a relative, from a relative frame, what you can do is you can short the higher stock and buy the lower stock, because it kind of it removes the whatchamacallit, like the market effects on it. So if the market goes up, like you're protected by your short, right?
Like delta risk.
Yeah, like you're protected by your short, you're long, but you're really trading the interfluctuation, and so that is what was called market, like. It's like returns that aren't dictated market neutral returns that like aren't necessarily dictated by, the fluctuations in the macro. But that's more like that's just pure numbers. And if you do that with enough size, you can make a lot of money. But I think like strategies like that, like if you can find a strategy like that, and that's kind of the job of the quant trader, that just will make you a ton of money, right?
Yeah. So you're saying the job is to find like a delta neutral strategy.
Well, that's one example, right?
But using algorithms to like look over large data sets to figure out the kind of strategy to do that, or
yeah, like that's one like family of strategies. Like I would describe quant trading, or like the job of a quant. I wouldn't really call myself a quant. Like what I'm doing isn't that sophisticated. Like what a quant does necessarily, like they're researchers, and they take what information is available to them and they quantify it. That's why they're called quants. They quantify it in a way that computers and algorithms can then work with, and then they try to find alpha. So it's like a delta, like alpha between.
Because alpha is the leading coefficient that means returns above the rest of the market.
Yeah, returns above
what you'd expect.
The like free market rate, pretty much. Or like the risk-free rate. And so it's like with the same.
It's like the expected market return plus risk-free or something like.
Or it's the amount above, like as long as like it's with the same amount of risk involved. Yeah. So like if you have the same risk but with more returns, that's alpha. And so they're trying to, like, that's what they're trying to find, but they're taking all these sources and then aggregating it. And so within quant, there's different, like kind of families. Like some are just like purely like technical or numbers based. Like for example, if you have access to like the order books, and you can like very quickly respond to like high, like massive bids or massive sells, then that is like high frequency trading, and you're kind of like operating in like the millisecond, sub-millisecond level. And that's when, you know, like you want your data center as close to the New York Stock Exchange as possible. And there's other like system where it's more discretionary, where you're like just taking aggregating data sources and then producing, you know, like having a computer rather than like you're an individual produce like, you know, what stocks to buy and short and positions to get into. That's the quant side of things. And so when you hear like, you know, oh, my quant told me this, like on Twitter, you're like, you know, my quant says this shitcoin is gonna go 100x. That's kind of like a play, because like, you know, like they're not really quants. What they're saying is like, I have this one guy that like, you know, makes calls on these coins, and like he thinks he's good at trading, so like he's like my quant. Whereas it's just kind of like you're just trading shitcoins. And it's not to say like to entirely discredit what they do, because like I think a lot of, you know, you mentioned alpha. I think a lot of the alpha in the world in general is finding things that people ridicule but actually have inherent value. And I think crypto is actually one of those things. A lot of people look down on crypto. They look at it and they're like, it's kind of a degenerate's game. But then again, like, you know, when people kind of turn a blind eye towards something, that is inherently alpha if there's value there, because that means there's less people looking at it than it deserves, right?
So when you made the switch, you were working at Scale AI, you started looking into crypto a bit more. Do you see what you do now as gambling also, or do you, I mean, you take a pretty measured approach.
Yeah,
So-
it's like there's things you can do, right? Like if
Yeah.
I was just like, you know, full porting into shitcoins, that'd be gambling. But what
It kind of explain like what you started doing, like when you kind of got into it, what you do now.
Yeah, I mean, like I don't want to like explain too much, but I think the general thing is like a lot of things that happen on chain, especially with like smaller shitcoins, everything's public, right? So it's a matter of like being able to aggregate data and like, you know, you have to look at who you're trading against and who you're trading, like what strategies you can implement. Who you're trading against are people that don't necessarily like have, like, you know, if I'm just a meme coin trader, like I'm not gonna have access, or like I can't respond fast enough, right? When there's like a big position that is starting to sell, right? Like I'm probably gonna be a few seconds behind if I'm really good. And I also don't have access to like what kind of like every single person that traded this coin, like what are their transaction histories, or I have access to it, but there's no way I can possibly as an individual process it and think about it and like then derive patterns of their trading systems and other things like that, right? The point is there's a lot of data on chain that is very valuable, but an individual person, right, like who is just trading it, has no real way of using that in any good form. Whereas, you know, what I'm doing is I'm building a system where we do take those signals into account, and so like everything that happens on chain, like, you know, for every single wallet, for every single coin, for every single thing, there's like, you know, there's some characteristics that we ascribe to it, and then that informs us more on like, you know, the risk profile of a particular trade, and also what the potential upside is. And so the reason I got into it was like, this isn't like my end all be all. I'm not trying to like, you know, just do this and like, one, I'm not gonna make, you know, like, you know, so many millions of dollars doing this. And two, like this is not like what I like, you know, this is not like my art, right? But what it is like if you're able to, because there's so much volume, there's so much money moving through it, like if you're able to, you know, get consistent returns, and because of the volatility, like the trading window, the time frame for holding some of these positions is like, you know, minutes even, and so you can get a lot of trades in, and so even with a moderate kind of,
You have algorithms that do this for you, right?
yeah, so it's just passive.
these
Like I
trades,
just, you know,
yeah.
the idea is like I just sit around and it just does its thing, and in the aggregate, because you're making so many trades and there's so much volatility, and if as long as you size correctly and you have the right inputs, you'll make pretty consistent returns that like are relatively market neutral, and also you're not going to have too many like down days either. So it's just a form of cash flow, like just like having the, like I just want to be able to have cash flow and then kind of, you know, then do my own thing. Like I have I have some projects I want to do involving like art and fashion, and also whenever there's like an opportunity in AI that I think is really good, I'll probably like, you know, dabble in that as well. But it just kind of like frees up my like, time and resources to like be able to pursue something that I really want to do.
So then you're still looking at AI, because that was another question I had with these massive, massive comp coming out for people in AI right now.
Yeah.
Is that kind of getting your interest to go back towards that? Or I guess you're somewhat do you use machine learning in the algorithms that you use for crypto?
Yeah, and it's not like the most sophisticated thing in the world. Like most of the work comes from aggregating the data. And the other like alpha, I would say, I don't know if I should say this out loud, but I guess I'm here anyways, is that because there's like fundamentally a limited liquidity in these markets, the big quant firms like the Jane Streets, they're not looking in these small markets because there's not enough cap on it for them to be interested in.
So you're only really competing with retail investors.
Mostly with retail.
Heard about this stock on Twitter, or
yeah, like that's the idea, right?
Yeah.
It's like you're competing with retail, not necessarily with the machine.
So you're one of the only kind of.
Like I think I'm sure that I actually.
There's probably some people, but I feel like what you were saying, they need to get $1 billion returns, but if there's only so much liquidity in this market in these shit coins, they can only make maybe a few million if they did really well, and that's
nothing. That's like peanuts. So like and
it's
not worth the salary of their quant engineers to do that. And so it's like.
But to an individual, it's cool.
To an individual, it's potentially just like not infinite, but like consistent cash flow that like then you don't have to really worry about anything. Like I think I'm in a fortunate position now, like after scale, where like, for the foreseeable future, like I have the discretion to like spend my time how I want, but like that's not gonna last forever, right? So it's like my dream, my ideal, this kind of touches back on like this. Our generations, we're striving to free up time for ourselves, right? So my goal is to free up the financial aspect of my life to then pursue things that like will allow me to, potentially make even more money, or just things that I'm interested in, right? Because like the big reason people raise money to start companies, one's to hire people, of course, but like also like to get started, like for most projects, you don't really need to hire people. What it really is, the reason why people raise money is to say that they're doing something, and two, to put a roof over their heads, right?
I mean, would you also say though it can scale your, it can really scale your growth much quicker than if you hadn't raised money in a lot of cases?
Oh, of course. Like you need initial capital for most projects to start and like to market it and like to get returns on it. But then like raising money comes with a lot of caveats. But I think like for me, like if you just have the cash flow there, and you don't need to raise money, right? Like to pursue a project, that just frees you up to do a lot more things, and there's also a lot less hassle involved with that. Like you're getting the best parts of both worlds. You just need to put a little bit of work in ahead of time to kind of like get to that point,
Yeah. Because I can understand why, coming from Stanford, surrounded by guys all talking about how much money they raised and kind of just trying to get a bigger number than the last person. I can understand why you have some cynicism towards raising capital, but for me, I've been trying to teach more people like at ASU and people like that about raising money, because I know a lot of business guys don't even really think of it as an option, because the way I see it is, I mean, you can hyperscale your growth, and yes, you gave up ownership, but ideally, if you raised the right amount and things went well, you could reach a level of growth that got you returns you would have never been able to had you not given up ownership.
No, yeah, for sure. I mean, like it's not like raising money isn't a bad thing. Like I'm not gonna say like don't raise money. I think, and it's what my point is, like it's not free money,
Yeah.
And it's
like,
not
all it's like,
right. And I think
it's not like just the best solution to everything. Like
it is a very good solution to a lot of problems, and I think when you sit down and when you do raise money, you have to think about what are the problems that I am facing, and will having more money solve those problems? In a lot of cases, it's yes, but in a lot of cases, the problems you're facing aren't necessarily cash constrained. Like for example, if your problem is I don't really have product market fit, well, having more money isn't going to solve that. Like what you should do is figure out. You should put ideas out there to like find something that has traction, and once you have traction, then you can raise all the money in the world, right? And then you're in a very good position. But like if you're just raising money and you have no idea whether or not people want your product, then you're not like having more money isn't really going to fix that. And so, and with the money, it's not just the ownership that you give up. The other thing you give up is also potential like it's control over your company.
Yeah, voting rights.
Not just voting rights. Depends on if you give up board seats, but it's also like just you're locked in basically. You have investors now. Like
and you almost work for them.
You essentially you work for yourself and them, but like based on the structure, like a lot of times I see people get into a company and it's like they raise a ton of money, and now that money doesn't go to them. They're using someone else's money to pay someone else, like their employees, and they're essentially an employee at their own company, right? And like once you raise that money, it's a very committal step, and you're like basically locked in there. And so if you ever do have a change of heart, it's really hard to get out. Like if you realize your company's not going anywhere, and you have employees, like that's a really tough position. Like if you have 6 people working for you, and nothing's happening, or like you're not getting any kind of traction, and you raise all this money, now you're in a position where like you can't just stop, right? Because you have people that you're taking care of, and also you don't want to just like you want to if you're a good person, you want to do right by your investors. And also at points on the flip side, if you are doing well, sometimes investors will have a lot of opinions on what you should do, and you don't necessarily want that all the time either, right?
Yeah, it can be very distracting. They can maybe take you in the wrong direction, like get you to launch a new product.
Yeah, and that's also why like the quality of an investor is important as well. Like raising from Sequoia is not the same as raising from some no-name venture capital firm, and so it's like because it's not just the quality of investor, it's also about the quality of the connection, and it's also a signal to other like if you raise from a Sequoia, you're going to have a much easier time raising a second round, whereas if you raise from a venture capital firm that like isn't necessarily that established or doesn't really have many exits or have good people, and then you try to raise from Sequoia, they're going to be like, who are these people, right? And they might be a little less privy to like entering into a round at that point. So that's like a caveat, right?
Yeah, well, with investment funds, it's pretty common to raise a significant amount of capital for that.
Yeah.
Are you planning to raise money for Rhythm Capital?
No, because the returns on like I mentioned earlier, like the returns are like not infinite. Like you might be able to turn like $100,000 into like $1 million pretty quickly, but you're not going to be able to turn $100 million to $1 billion because there's just not enough liquidity. So the growth curve, even if I'm like even if it turns out to be like the best performing fund ever, the growth curve will be like asymptotic at first, and then it'll be linear. So it'll be like
there's
at
a
certain
carrying
point,
capacity.
right? At a certain
How
point,
much you can be making.
the returns is a constant fixed number per month.
Have you quantified what you think that would be?
I don't want to throw numbers out there, but I think it's enough for me to be very comfortable.
Okay.
And so like once you hit that point, right? If I then so the difference then in raising, like because if you were to do like a hedge fund with stocks, like raising like $100 million, even though that dilutes down your share, like that doesn't matter because like the overall cap is still
much higher.
So you're still making the same returns. But if I dilute my shares down right now, then once I hit that critical level, I'm just giving up way too much money per month, or like per year or whatever. And so it's
when it would have taken you maybe another year to
it would have just been like one more year to scale up to that, even maybe less to scale up to the same amount. So it's like the long-term returns on that is different. So I don't anticipate on raise. I might, like if it is successful, like, then I might like, allow for like a friends and family round, just to kind of, I like to have a good group of people around me. So like, if it's doing well and I can guarantee it's going to do well, then I'll bring some like, I'll bring you, I'll bring Ben and some other people, have them chip in a little bit, and then like we all share in the profits. But like, otherwise I won't be raising much if anything. And yes, but that would be different though if I'm doing like an AI startup, right? Then I might look into raising, but I don't really have necessarily ideas of doing that just yet.
Okay, but it's something that you kind of consider doing in the future or see yourself doing in the future?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like once the technology kind of matures a bit more. Like it's been maturing very very quickly. But what I'm really looking for is like what I'm looking for right now, if it's not like AGI, is at least much more consistent results in like the outputs of LLMs.
So like less hallucinations or
yeah, just less hallucinations, like a higher just like success rate. Like even for like a small task, right? Like you can have even in the current state, I think like, you know, if you have some I have like my like super great app that, you know, takes the user input and then I pass it through an LLM. A good example is like Decagon. I don't know if you heard of it, but they're basically a company that does AI like phone like customer service. I think. I haven't really kept up, but like that's one thing. And you know, I don't know how well they're doing. I think they're doing pretty well, at least from the news I've read. But like I think if I were them, probably one of the biggest challenges I faced, you know, not saying I haven't worked there, so I wouldn't know, but I'm kind of like just giving an example, is like, for example, if someone comes at the customer service with a request saying, oh, my refund didn't go through, like, you know, can you check and refund for me? And say that's like one potential workflow, right? And then the LLM, the agent, has to then take the user's request, figure out what he wants to do, and then probably pick from a set of tools and a set of like, you know, interfaces that then verifies the request didn't go through, and then like then maybe potentially, you know, sends a confirmation, then maybe potentially then issues a refund, right? And in between each of those steps, like the LLM has to produce like the exact right output. Like it can't be wrong at all. Like it, be it like, you know, some kind of like error with like the confirmation number. Like every single step, there's like maybe like 5 or 6 steps, maybe even more in between, has to work, right, for the whole thing to be successful. And you know, if each of those steps has a 99% success rate, if you multiply that out across 5 or 6 steps, then you're getting like a 5% failure rate, which is really bad, right? And so every error that an LLM is potentially making is just compounded because of the complexity of some of these tasks.
True.
And so like 99% might sound good, but it's nowhere near good enough. You need like 99.99, not 9 even. And like for certain tasks, maybe even more than that. And I think, and the other problem is like that last percentage to perfection is by far the hardest thing to do. So I think people get very carried away. We're not carried away, but like, you know, a lot of the hype around AI has been going from like the 0% to like the 90%. Like when ChatGPT came out, right? It was like, everyone was like, you know, for good reason, like really, really, really like freaking out of their minds, or like this is gonna change the world. Because they were looking at the 0 to 90. And that's very impressive, don't get me wrong. Like that is like, it has changed a lot of the ways that we do things. But that 0 to 90 is maybe 0.1% as difficult as going from 90 to 99, which is maybe 0.1% as difficult from going 99 to 99.9. And so there's just so much more work involved in getting like that last bit, which seems so close, like so close yet so far, right? Like it seems like it's such a gap that we should be able to bridge, but I just think like right now, the technology isn't quite there yet for most things I would want to build. But you know, once it does, or like once it gets close, then I'll definitely explore things like that. So.
Until then, you mentioned going into like art or fashion. What kind of projects do you have in mind with that?
I mean, these are kind of like just my kind of like pet projects. Not pet projects, but more like I was very artistic when I was younger. I wouldn't say I've lost that, but I've definitely put that on more of the back burner in high school and college, simply because like in high school I was very focused on like math and CS and technology. And,
actually, you got to tell the story about how you got into Stanford, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say this is how I got into Stanford, but I think this is like definitely a big contributing factor.
Okay.
Everyone, like, you know, when people ask, like, I say I go to Stanford, a lot of the times people ask like, oh, what got you in? I can't say definitively because I didn't look at there's actually a chance when I was on campus where you can like look at the file, like your admissions file. I think a lot of people went to look at it, but I just refrained. I was kind of like, for some reason I just didn't want to look at it. Maybe I'm afraid of the judgment or whatever, but I most likely what it was in high school, senior year, actually, like just before applications were open. because I had some programming experience, I was like, you know, I was working on
What
this
experience?
programming.
Programming
Yeah.
experience. Okay.
I was working on this math problem that actually had bothered me since I was a very young kid.
Math problem that bothered you?
Yeah, that
This is your very own. How did it like first come across your attention?
okay. I'm gonna sound like such a fucking nerd, but so when I was like in elementary school and I was learning about like exponents, like 2 to the 2, 2 to the 3, or whatever.
Yeah.
I was like learning about that. I thought I was like just exploring as a kid does, and I was on my calculator. I was literally like playing with my calculator. I was like just like putting like what I was doing like power towers. What that means is like I would raise like 2 right to itself, so I get 4, right? Then I would raise 2 to that number, so I get 2 to the 4, you get 16, and then you raise 2 to the 16, you get like 65,000 something, and then you raise 2 to the 65,000 something. That's like a massive number, right? And I was doing that with like various numbers, just kind of because I was really like interested in seeing how fast that grows, right? And obviously with 2, it'll just go off to infinity very quickly. But I realized that if you go down to 1.4, like if you repeat that process with 1.4, like if you raise 1.4 to the 1.4, and then you raise 1.4 to that again, right? You would still kind of expect like it will grow to infinity because you're like raising it, but it stops actually. It stops at it doesn't ever get past like 1.9 or something. Like no matter how many times you do it, right? But at 1.5, it does grow to infinity. It'll grow. So, but I was a kid. I was like, what is that number? Like, what is the threshold, right? In which below that number it kind of stays constant, and above that number you go to infinity. But I had no way of solving that as a kid because I was like, I don't know, I was like maybe like 9 or 10, and so like I didn't know any calculus or anything. But then in high school, I was like, I kind of revisited that problem, and I actually solved it. So I solved that problem. Because what I realized is you could graph y to the x, or you can graph x equals y, like a straight line.
Yeah.
And you can graph, I think it was like y to the x or something. Or no, it was not y to the x. It was x to the x, right? That's another curve. Or no, it'll be the number you're interested in to the x. And so what happens is with numbers greater like 2 to the x looks like this, right?
Yeah.
But y equals x looks like that. And so effectively what we're doing is each time you make that operation, you're kind of bouncing between those 2 lines, right? And so it bounces to infinity very quickly. But as you decrease the base, like as you go from 2 to like 1.5 to 1.4, it gets flatter and flatter. And so at 1.4, like 1.4 to the x actually intersects with y to the x. So at a certain point, if you keep doing that operation, you get stuck, and it never passes a certain point. And so the critical point is when, the number you're looking for, like n to the x, is tangent to y to the x. And then you can find that point by, doing some calculus. And I figured it out. And I was like, oh my God, this problem I thought about since for like, 10 years or whatever, or 8 years or whatever, I finally solved it. So that was pretty cool. And then at the same time, I was looking at this video about fractals. And this one YouTuber was like talking about how fractals are created. And fractals, for like a quick crash course, is like it's kind of like a mathematical kind of like art form almost. It looks like art, but there's a lot of
patterns.
It's like it's like
iteration.
It's like self-similar patterns.
Yeah.
Is the broader definition, but like there's in math in particular, in the field of like complex numbers, there's a way to like produce fractals that if you apply some operation over and over and over to all points on the complex plane, you get a fractal. And that's like, I don't know if people have seen the Mandelbrot set, but that's like the most famous example, right? And so, being the nerd that I was like looking into that. And one of the YouTubers that I was looking at, when he was explaining how fractals are created, had a very similar illustration to the method that I had used to solve the math problem I was thinking about. And so because of that, I kind of like saw a connection there. And then I was just doing some experimenting. I was like, what if I tried to produce fractals similar to the method that I had used, in nature that was similar to the problem that I was working with, like the power towers. It's called tetration. And so I was building these tetration fractals, and then on my little Java program, and then I switched around some of like the rendering methods. Because what you're really doing is like you're just crunching numbers, but then you have to map those numbers into like a color like produce an image. And so I was like, kind of messing around with that. And I got this like one really cool looking image. I'm sure we can like throw it up on the screen for people when we edit it. And so like, I thought it was like super cool. And so I was like reaching out to people like that were into these math circles, and I ended up reaching out to the American Mathematical Society, and they put my fractals up on their website because they actually had a section for mathematical art. And I'm like, oh my God, American Mathematical Society, they recognize my work.
That's awesome.
And so I put that in my application, and actually it was funny because like when I had applied, I included my art as an art supplement, but it wasn't officially published yet. And so like about like 3 weeks later, they actually published it, and like I frantically emailed the admissions officer. I was like, oh, by the way, like check out my gallery, and she actually got back to me. She responded to me like a day or whatever, and like she was very nice. I was like, oh, this is probably a good sign. I thought she was like just being polite, right? And then it turns out I got in, a few weeks later, and because I applied early, and yeah, that was like, one of the craziest days of my life, just opening the admissions letter. And yeah, so to that day, I still, I have a very like special place in my heart for that admissions officer. And yeah, kind of like I think that's probably what got me to Stanford, along with like, academics or whatever. So yeah.
Sick. Yeah.
and so like, actually what's funny is in my algorithms, some of the techniques that I use to generate the fractals, like for my quant trading stuff, I'm like actually using a few, like not techniques, but things that are inspired by fractals. So it's honestly a bit of a recurring theme in my life. Like these fractals that I made, like it kind of keeps popping up over and over at certain points in my life. Because there was that one point where I actually wanted to like publish it as like artwork or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, but that's quick tangent. That's how I got into fractals. I think that's how I got
if you go
into
into fashion, maybe that's how you can bring it up again.
People have told me like I should like
some kind of like streetwear with like
that
fractals incorporated into the design.
Yeah, because honestly, like
imagining a really
you can't see it on camera, but like that poster
I'll put it
I
on
have
the
there,
screen. Yeah.
Yeah, that is one of my fractals. And it just looks I feel like on a shirt that would be pretty well. Like I could probably
I'm
sell
thinking
it.
of that like on like the sleeves
like,
or something on the like kind of edges. Like
yeah.
a oversized like kind of heavy cotton type of shirt.
So I might drop some merch. And I have a friend who's actually doing like a fashion brand. So he knows a lot of the people that like produce.
Do you have like a brand name in mind for that, or
no idea? Like this is kind of just in my head at the moment.
Got you, yeah.
But yeah, but the idea is like now that I have more discretion with my time, I'm looking into some of these more creative things, and yeah, so excited to see where all that goes.
Yeah, man. And then, so at Stanford, did you work at Anduril?
I did work at Anduril. Yeah.
How was that?
It was dope. So I interned at Anduril I think sophomore going into junior year. It was during COVID, and so that was very interesting because like Anduril, they're very like Republican, right? Like Palmer Luckey, very right wing.
Did you meet him?
I did. He was cool.
Really?
Yeah.
That's sick.
So during that time, like, and I honestly like wasn't really like I didn't love the fucking COVID restrictions. I was kind of like gung ho about it. I was
COVID restrictions?
The COVID restrictions.
Oh, COVID restrictions.
I was like, I didn't really want to wear my mask around. I just wanted to go places, and like, a lot of like my sister was was very mad at me for wanting to do that. But I felt like I kind of aligned with, I guess, Palmer on some of those things. So actually,
it's probably really chill in the office, right? With that. Like,
yeah, they're very chill there. So it was. I was interning for Anduril because I heard about it from my Swiss friend who's like really into politics. And he was like, "This is a pretty cool company." So I applied, or I saw when I was like looking at internships, I saw like their logo. I was like, "Oh, this is pretty familiar."
That was like probably really.
This
close
was super
to when
early.
Were founded,
this was super. This was like they were I think 1 billion valuation, maybe even less at that point. I think they're
probably only a year old, right?
Yeah, they were like one and a half years old.
Okay.
And so I think now they're like something around like 30 or something. But I applied and I was like, oh shit, this is that company my friend was talking about. And so I applied. They got back to me, and it was supposed to be a virtual interview because everything was virtual then. But I was back home in LA because of COVID, and they're in Orange County, and I was like, and I feel like I make a better impression in person. Like I always get that like on Zoom calls. Like I get off a Zoom call with someone, then I meet them in person, and they're like, oh, you're so much taller than I expected, you know. So I was like, I kind of like wanted, I don't know.
I feel like I can bring way more presence when I can shake someone's hand and like.
No, yeah, like
talk to
I
them.
want to be able to have that because I feel like over a screen it's so hard to like really make an impression, and like obviously like I wanted this internship, so I was like I'm gonna do everything I can to get this internship. So I went in person, and like they were actually like I think very surprised and also very happy that I wanted to go in person. So I went down there. It was like a 3-hour interview process. I think I guess I did pretty well. So I interned there. I think the summer after. When it was like technically still COVID, and I was kind of greedy, so I also had an Amazon internship that summer, and I'm like, well, I kind of want to do both, and so I moved up my Anduril internship to be during the school year. So I was interning at Anduril from I think April to June, and then Amazon from June to September, and so like for during spring quarter. Was actually still COVID, and so like they actually brought back the juniors on campus. We were living in EVGR, which is like the apartment buildings, but because everything was remote, I just like I lived in OC, but I like flew back to campus every other week to like hang out with people. But it was all good because like the classes were all remote. We could just like take exams online, so it was super chill. Well, not chill, but like it was. I made it work. And yeah, so that was my time at Anduril. I met some really cool people. Actually, Peter, I think you were hanging out with him. We were hanging out last night. Peter was one of my good friends from Anduril, and so I think he's also in the city now. So like, yeah, like all these connections, like they're still around. And I feel like you just, especially at a place like Anduril, you just meet so many like unique people. Because I think like defense tech, I think now it's getting pretty big, but like back in 2021. It was kind of like almost unheard of, or it was like Anduril was like kind of the odd duckling of tech companies, because most tech companies, one, they were very left leaning in their kind of politics. So, but Palmer was obviously.
That's why he was ousted from Meta, right?
Yeah, he was a huge.
Because he voted for Trump.
Yeah, he was a very big Trump supporter.
Yeah.
Even back in 2016, and so like there's obviously that divide. But actually, I think that helped Anduril's growth because like all the people that they hired. Right. Not everyone, but like a lot of the people that they hired felt like they were kind of like fighting against the machine, right? They were like, they were the
canceling,
the cancel culture, all that shit.
Yeah.
And so that like really caused the culture to be like really like driven.
Yeah.
And I think that's why they've been doing very well, along with the leadership of Palmer and like the connections that he has.
I feel like there's a rise in very conservative organizations like that where everyone seems pretty.
There is. I think it's honestly gone a bit out of hand.
You think so?
Yeah. I'm quite conservative, but I think that like
it shouldn't be just conservatives because I feel like
if
it's like a liberal place, I feel like it'll be kind of a mix.
Like people, I think
conservative, the liberals don't want to touch it, so it ends up just getting too conservative. Maybe you think.
Yeah, I also think people are stuck in 2016. Like people are still like, I think people are casting like woke culture as like the biggest enemy. Like if you're against woke culture, like you're part of our team and you should do everything you can to like go against woke culture. But like woke culture is kind of dead. Like people that are woke, like we don't really like no one really fucks with them. And
yeah, even like on the left. Like,
yeah, even on the left.
Some of my friends that are super left, I'll have them even like not making fun of, but like telling people that are like trying to cancel stuff to like chill the fuck out. Like.
Right, exactly. So it's kind of like that's people who are, I think what I'm talking about when I say like conservatism has gone out of hand. Yeah. I'm not saying people are too conservative. I'm saying a lot of the people that consider themselves conservatives are still of the mindset of 2016.
Or they're like kind of fighting against this imaginary.
You're still fighting against something that's kind of already been defeated. I'm just like grow up already. Like there are bigger things now in the world. And so that's kind of like what I mean. So I think that, and I think it does bring about a bit of a cult like mindset. I think at any given point, if you're like a critically thinking person, you should constantly be like self-evaluating and thinking like, my beliefs, like where do they come from? How are they shaped? Are they rooted in reality? Because I think especially with today's age, you have so much information that is just like, for example, I for some of my, I have a lot of friends in crypto, right? And you have like if you're not an insider, if you don't like know people who like kind of pull the strings behind the scenes of like you might like you have no idea like as an observer why a certain coin did the numbers that it did, you know. But like in the reality, it's like you have people and money and just like organizations that promote what, you know, people like the insiders want to promote, and then it's just kind of dumped on retail, right? But retail is like none the wiser. They're just like, oh, this coin ran, you know, it went to 100 million, I'm gonna buy this coin. But like it's not random. None of it is random.
You don't think?
Like some of it could be random, but like a vast majority.
Do you
of
think
it,
there's like a big internal community? I mean, do you
in
know
crypto,
a lot of these people? I mean, well, obviously,
yeah.
but
I mean, in crypto, it's.
But I'm
it's,
saying like that actually are like controlling like which coins that get like promoted.
Well, not
or is that what you're saying?
Not controlling, but like my point is like this, like the way it works, it's an attention economy, right? And so like attention, like money follows where attention goes, and so because of that, like there's a really strong vested interest to control the attention. And so if you want to make a coin do very well, like you have people and insiders that like, you know, will pump coins, right?
Yeah.
I'm not an insider, FYI. Like I'm not like, you know, don't try to like come at me for like, you know, calls or whatever. Like I'm not really involved. I just know people that are, and
Really?
it's like it's just like very yeah. It's so, but like that's kind of
So
like.
you're not? Are you just talking about people that like, let's say I'm running a crypto project,
Yeah.
and I'm an insider of my crypto project, and I, you know, hire some people to do social media marketing for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I hire like some of these social media guys to like say, yo, you
Yeah,
gotta buy this
yeah.
coin.
It's like influencers. So like
Is that what you're talking about, or are you saying something a little bit?
I'm
deeper?
not saying like insider trading. I'm just saying like people that like.
Well, I mean, I guess you can't really have.
Yeah, they're not
like-
securities.
Yeah.
But like one example, like I'll throw this out there is like, you know, there was this platform called Pump Fund. You might have heard of
Yeah.
it. Like that's kind of like where a lot of shitcoins get launched. And they launched their own token. They had their own shitcoin called Pump. And at first, like they had a pre-sale, which means before they put it up for like, you know, live
So you know
trading.
they'll do like the Discord things, get like a bunch of people,
Yeah,
like,
people-
ahead of time, and then know
Right.
of like what's going on.
So they had a pre-sale of like, you know, their tokens, and so they sold their tokens to people ahead of time at like, I think it was like 4 billion market cap. But when they actually launched the coin, it was at 2 billion, and so it was at 4 billion and it was relatively expensive. And so at first people were like really calling them out. Like people on Twitter were like, this is bullshit. Like, you know, like they're just being super extractionary. Like they're like, so the sentiment online was very, very negative toward Pump Fund. But it turns out, but like a few weeks later, like a few days later even, a lot of the big names. So in crypto, there's like COLs, like key opinion leaders. A lot of the big names started tweeting like very Pump Fund in a very positive light. They were like, oh, like this is like the most hype launch ever. This is super bullish for this reason, blah, 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 blah. So in the course of a week, the sentiment on crypto Twitter went from being very, very anti-Pump Fund for their launch to actually quite pro, and like there's a bit of FOMO. So over the course of the week, the narrative shifted completely, right? And that wasn't organic. It turned out these people, they're getting paid like 40 grand, 100 grand to like say these things about their thing, right? So my point isn't saying that like I'm not saying this is even a bad thing. I'm just saying this is reality. Like if I like, this is just something that happens, you know, like if I was a company, I would want people to have a positive view on my product. If I was Pump Fund, I would want people to have a positive view on my product. And if I was one of these key opinion leaders, yeah, like my command, my craft is attention. It's a command over attention. And so of course I'd monetize, right? I'm not saying anyone is in the wrong. All I'm saying is as a consumer, as like a retail, like your opinions are shaped by people that you might not necessarily know are shaping your opinions, right? Yeah. And like, you know, it might not be, it could be sinister, it could just be like, you know, for a shitcoin. But the point is like, you know, public opinion is so easily molded. And so I think kind of back to the point of Andrew and like conservatism is like, I think, you know, because like no one is immune to that. Like you might think you're immune, you're really not. And even if you are immune, like in the macro, like people like, it's actually pretty easy to like measure how things shift. I'll get into this a bit later. It's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's a really cool point. And so I think it's important to like always evaluate if you value your own ideas, your own autonomy, your own like kind of thinking. It's important to consistently evaluate okay, where are my ideas coming from? Who am I listening to? What are their vested interests? Who might be behind them?
Yeah.
Right. And so I think right now modern day conservatism has like it's almost mainstream now. I think it is mainstream now, but I think it's like, you know, again, it's a lot of people that kind of are in a bit of a they're not really thinking for themselves, right?
Yeah, I feel like on both sides it's gotten to the point where it's like you kind of said, it's not really.
Yeah, it used to be very rebellious to be conservative because everyone was super liberal. But now it's kind of like, you know, there's a lot of conservatives now, so it's like it's not really you're not really fighting against the machine, or like, you know, you have to really think about why you're doing it, right? And my point about about molding the opinions of the masses. Actually, I was thinking about this the other day, and it's people always debate like, you know, whether we have free will, right? Like it's like, do we have free will? Do we not? And if you have free will, like what is, or if like people think it's like it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm blanking, but like, you know, people don't like to think that, you know, they don't have free will. And we're not going to talk about free will right now, but what I will talk about is like, I would say, the free will of society. And what I mean by that is, if you look at a population of say like 1,000 people, right? And if you were to like, you know, map their beliefs on a particular subject, you know, you get some kind of distribution. Like on one, let's just say it's like left versus right, right? You know, there'll be some people that are super leftist, some people that are super on the right, and you kind of have this like you'll probably have like a bell curve of people and their opinions. And even if each of those people, even if they're completely free to make whatever decision they want to make, right? But say you then like spread a message out there, like you blast a message on all the social media platforms. You're saying like, you know, you have a headline and everyone sees it, right? Even if an individual person, like as an individual person, you can choose, right? You can choose how you respond to that, right? But in aggregate, like because each person, this is kind of like the law of large numbers in statistics. Even though each person, if you think about it as a random variable, even though, you know, that the effects of that message on that person is non-deterministic, it's random. Like maybe like 80% they'll do one thing, 20% they'll do the other thing. Like you can't really say which way they'll lean. But in aggregate, like, and with the more people, this is just a law of statistics. The more samples, the more people there are that kind of like, you know, are affected by this like, you know, random probabilistic effect, the more strongly certain you get of the overall shift in like the sentiment across the population, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the expected value, or it's the expected value stays the same of like which way they move, but the standard deviation gets much smaller as you add more samples, right? So if you have one person, right, there's like, you know, you expect them to maybe like become more left-leaning because of this headline by like 5%, but you can't say for certain how much they're gonna move. But if you have like 100 million people, and each of them have that expected 5% move, the overall is gonna move about 5%, and it's not gonna be much less or much more. So my point is like, even though you might have individual ideas and free will and ways of looking at the problem, certain problems, in the aggregate as a population, it's very easy to manipulate public opinion. And so that's why I think like, you know, media is so important. The way we look at things is so important. Why it's like, you know, that's why I want to evaluate. Like I think it's important for people to evaluate their ideas and where they're getting them from. And it's hard.
Because I feel like a lot of people I know, they'll like say I'm on this side of politics. I feel like it should never be that. It should never be I am conservative, therefore I hold all these beliefs. I'm liberal, I hold all these beliefs. It should always be maybe you agree with a lot of a specific side, but you should have an individual opinion about every little thing. I feel like the more I feel like I'm just following the herd on something, the more I want to evaluate each thing. And when I was at LSE, I would talk to a lot of these guys about the political science kids on American politics because they felt very strongly.
Europeans love to talk about American politics.
Oh, they love it.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I would just try to get them to go out into like what their solution. What do you think the ideal solution would be? Maybe you don't like this character. What do you think would be better then? Like, let's try to think of a solution here and meet halfway in the middle. Yeah. And a lot of times we would be on complete opposite ends of political spectrums, but have a complete agreement on a proper solution. And I feel like
Yeah.
that shouldn't make sense. But
Yeah,
it
I
was,
mean, yeah, I think again, it's like you have to think about incentives, right? Like I think in this world, like I have very few like, first principles, but one of my first principles when I try to think about problems is incentives. It's like who benefits from this, who does not benefit from this. And the incentive, like the reason why there's such a divide between, liberals, conservatives, Democrats, like Republicans, it's like the incentive for people in power. Like if I was a politician,
Yeah.
right, I would love this divide, right? Because then
Exactly.
every single like problem falls into one of two categories, right? Like whether you believe
Yeah.
this or that. And so if I were to like, if I were to want to push some kind of message, and I just have to frame it in a certain way, right? And that would almost certainly be guaranteed to get like, the vast majority of Democrats or the vast majority of Republicans to vote a certain way. And it's particularly potent if then across the aisle, like if I was a Democrat and I have my Republican friends, and like they kind of frame it in their way that is so distinctly polar from my way of framing this problem. Whereas in reality, it's a lot more muddied. Like in everything in life, it's more gray. But if I frame it this way, they frame it that way, then we just have two camps of people that then hold the opinion very strongly. Because as a politician, especially in democracy, you don't want people that are kind of like lukewarm, right, on like 10 different subjects. Because then it's very hard to then actually get the vote. Like that's the way the system was supposed to be designed. Like the way the spirit of democracy is that everyone votes according to their own their own needs and their own the way they think, right? And they should have nuanced takes on a lot of these things, right? And so then that prevents a certain subset of the population from controlling all of the power, or like if I was just in this one political party from controlling all the power. But because now in our system we've separated every single topic down the middle of like red versus blue, then like everyone is stuck in their mode of thinking, right? And so it's like you just basically have people that just vote vote blue no matter who, or like always vote red. So it's like it almost defeats the purpose, right?
Yeah.
But again, it's like, but that's kind of just how things play out. I'm not a political scientist, I'm not trying to like prescribe anything, but like I think it's just like these are just observations that I have, and I think that like it's probably true of a lot of places.
I would agree. Yeah. Well, Steven, appreciate you taking the time to speak on here. This has been really awesome.
Of course.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I had a great time, and drink nectar. I can't wait for the next iteration. You have a new design coming out, right?
Yeah, new design,
Yeah.
new name, Amaranth.
Amaranth, right?
And I'm pretty stoked for that to come out as well. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Sweet.
appreciate you taking the time, man.
Absolutely.